Okay, I just can repeat Sophie's word. Hello and welcome everyone. Uh, Actually, this is my pleasure to introduce our guest with whom we are talking about a very serious topic like the meaning of co-production. So very welcome Rosie uh, Gard, uh, Garthwaite. Sorry, I couldn't spell it. I was not sure. She's from actually London. Work for BBC and Channel 4, as far I know, and she's working as a producer. Welcome Brigid from DOKLeipzig, from Leipzig Film Festival, and actually she has head of the doc industry, as far I know, since 2015. First the ladies, sorry. I'm glad to introduce Julianna Ugrin from Hungary. She's a producer, head of Éclipse film, and very welcome Patrick Hamm from Berlin, who is a Berlin-based producer and filmmaker, and all of them, they are very, very successful and have many award-winning documentaries behind. But before I really start to talk about a serious topic, I really would love to ask you to speak a little bit more details about yourself, not about personal life and so on, but actually we all know documentary film. My name is Groó. I will be the moderator. I am myself also a filmmaker, making documentaries and fictions. And if you cannot follow my Central European English, just tell me and I will try to repeat my questions. So, we all know that making and producing a documentary actually is a challenge and a huge pleasure, and with many fights, patience, and so on. I would like to ask you, what made you to choose this actually fantastic and most beautiful profession, which is not a hobby? Some people think this is a kind of hobby. So, Brigid.
I start. Well, I worked as a producer for a while, and then I realized after about 10 minutes that I did not have the thick skin that you need for it, and that unfortunately my personal ego is too big to be laid aside for the needs of the directors. But I love producers and I love working with producers. And so I have the pleasure every year of organizing the DOKLeipzig co-production market, which is kind of an integral core of the doc industry program. The doc industry program was founded 14 years ago. I think this is kind of interesting context. So let's go back to the origins of co-production, like why we find ourselves in times where we need to do cross-border collaboration. The co-production models were kind of set up, I think, by Creative Europe and also by the Council of Europe through Euromage. And the point was to encourage cross-border collaboration in order to protect the audiovisual cultural heritage that we carry with us. They were about actually equality and sharing of information and funds, and were designed to set up to try and make people's lives easier, especially if you were coming from regions that maybe didn't have as much as others. And it's, I think, somehow important to hold on to those utopian ideals, but the reality, of course, that we find ourselves living in now in 2018 is something completely different, and it's a beast that we are all I think we have to give up on this idea of expertise and just accept that we're all bumbling blindly through life, hoping for the best. And once you kind of can give yourself over to this, then you can have like a lot of fun with people, because everything is somehow an experiment. And so because of my curious nature and because of my love for producers, I now think that we really have one of the finest co-production markets in Europe. And I say that with great pride because it just finished a few days ago, but we really are trying our best to help finance films that otherwise I think would be very, very difficult to finance, and thus get into like this international market. And so Doc Industry Program is funded by Creative Europe. It also funds things like the Forum in Amsterdam. It funds Sheffield Meat Market. There are all of these platforms that are set up, designed to help producers connect with each other and also with decision makers. And so I really see myself as somebody who helps people find the right people to put their projects together. I see myself as a human matchmaker, you know, like a dating queen, and that the more beautiful relationships you can put together, the better. I mean, they don't always work out. Divorce is also a real thing, but for me, when I think about co-productions and when I look at financing plans, I don't see numbers, I see people. But maybe, Julianna, I give it to you because we know each other and because you've been in this market situation.
Okay, so yeah, 2 years ago we participated at this market, co-production market with a woman capture, which maybe you saw yesterday evening. And actually it became an international co-production there. We found our co-producer at that market, and a few days ago we were there with the next project, and yeah, co-productions are sometimes difficult, sometimes very fruitful, and it's really like a marriage, as you say, and it can end with divorce, but let's hope not to end with any divorce anymore. But the original question was why documentary, and why producing documentaries, and for me actually falling in love with documentaries, it came with Eurodoc, and I participated at Eurodoc, and I always encourage all the young producers to participate at this kind of workshops, because this can be really eye-opening, and there I saw so beautiful films, documentary films, that gave me much more pleasure and strength and whatever as a fiction film. So it was really I fell in love with documentary there, and there I said, okay, this is the kind of film I want to make, and it started there in almost 10 years ago, and since then I'm doing it, and yeah.
So you said that this is not a hobby. Well, I come from England, where there is almost no co-production possibilities. So I'm sitting on a panel about co-production. I apologize, I didn't read the rest of the description when they asked me to join it yesterday. But I can talk to you about alternative financing models as a result of that. But you said it wasn't a hobby, and I remember the first thing, we were very lucky and got our film into Sundance. And I turned up, and the person who I knew had been kind of backing us said, "Welcome, honey. Just remember, for you and for all us Americans, this is a hobby. It's not a job. Get yourself a job." I'm like, okay, I'll get a job. So I got a job at the BBC, and now I do this as a hobby on the side. I have three films with my newly exiled production company. We used to be in the Middle East. It's not so easy in Qatar right now, so we moved to London and South Africa and Chicago, and we are making 3 projects at the moment, which are all very exciting, and each one has its own complex co-pro possibilities that I still don't understand, and I hope that by the end of this panel I will understand how I can exploit those possibilities. Yes, and I would like to also talk about the dangers of having a film, because our last film had this awkward situation where it had multiple nationalities in it and no dominant language other than kind of badly spoken English, that is a real problem within co-pros, where language is a real dominating factor when you're trying to win people over. And so, funnily enough, minority Ghanaian languages don't go down well when you're trying to get money from other nations. Anyway, that's it.
Okay, men last. It's going to be like that. I will speak last on every question. So how did I get involved in this? I've been doing this for about 5-6 years. Before that, I had a different career as an academic. I have a PhD in sociology, and I thought I was going to be a professor. And then after I finished my PhD and spent some time as a lecturer, myself and a classmate decided we're going to do a summer project, a documentary project. that turned into the film that's screening here tomorrow. So it turned into a 3-year journey. But I guess, yeah, the realization that me and my friend had at the time was that we were very passionate about the ideas, and not just the ideas that we were exposed to, but generally the notion of taking an idea, conveying it to an audience, and hopefully changing some minds. I know I sound like an idealist because I am, even though it's hard to stay that way these days. But yeah, so for me the starting point was very much that, and it's continued ever since. So I'm by no means a professional. I never went to film school. Everything I learned, I sort of had to learn by doing over the last few years, and it's an ongoing adventure. But all my projects so far have been international collaborations of filmmakers from 2 or more countries. I had one project actually with a Hungarian filmmaker. That being said, those were not co-productions. I'm sorry, I keep on causing that noise. Not co-production in the sense that we had co-production financing through a co-production market here in Europe, but they were international collaborations, and the financing, I think, followed more the alternative financing that you just described. But currently I'm doing my first co-production, so I have a little bit of wisdom to share. It's in fact a film that came together through DOKLeipzig, and yeah.
I have a comment on the hobby element of this, which is that because of the distribution possibilities and because of the financing possibilities for documentary at the moment are, for most of us, let's say, not so great. It does encourage us to hobbify or amateurize some elements of the work that we do. And it also causes us to have to rely on people in kind of exploitative conditions. So someone is usually being exploited in the production chain, whether it's working for deferrals or not being paid at all, or staying on the floor of someone's apartment that they can afford to rent for Sundance, or like whatever. There is an element of self-exploitation and exploitation of others in the process. And it's really dangerous. Like, it's a really dangerous game to get into. And so actually the more we can professionalize, and the more advice you can get from lawyers, and the more you can draw on the resources of programs like a Eurodoc or EAFA once you're more established, or even something like Balkan Documentary Center's BDC program, the more kind of transparently we can share information with each other about how people are structuring their financing plans and paying for things, and how much the reality of things cost, the better actually we can all be. And it's really good to make an old friend, like an old person, genuinely an old person, who has watched the evolution and understands why we are now at the place that we are, and can explain it to you. Because I also was at EAFA, which is a training initiative, as an expert last year, and the woman who helps people fix their financing plans, really went from the evolution of the European market that we have now from the beginning to the end. And for me, it was just like the most eye-opening thing, because then you kind of understand better the challenges that we have now. And since then, instead of being like, oh, old people always talking about the good old days when you could finance a film from one place with one broadcaster, I found that conversation very boring. But if you can find somebody who can frame it within the context of the troubles that we have today, actually it's very, very eye-opening.
So actually, back to the hobby again. Some new thoughts came to my mind. No. Out of joke, of course, I think all filmmakers are in love with the job we are doing. It's a kind of hobby and a job at the same time. Sometimes the enthusiasm is not so much paid, and hobby means that we can wake up early in the morning for our main protagonist, and we are worried for years about their lives and so on, and we can follow them endlessly. So actually, this is a big, long journey. But back to the very, very first steps. You are producers, experts, matchmakers, sometimes psychologists who support your directors, saying that, oh, stay alive, don't jump from the balcony, we will make this film even it takes, I don't know, years. So actually, the very first step when you pick a project or you decide to support, to start a long journey with the project, and you decided to make it with co-productional partners, what is the first thing you advise or you make together with your director concerning, of course, the topic? So this is, I think, it could be very important information for those who are really beginners. Is it? Okay.
Okay. It's a hard question. I mean, every case are different, and sometimes the director comes with a very strict idea. She or he wants to make a film about this and this and that, and that's all. But what in documentary we face a lot of times that reality doesn't bring what we planned when we were writing synopsis and treatments and all this kind of stuff. So I think it's very important to find the core of the film. I mean, as we call it at Doc Incubator, the DNS of the film, the DNA. Sorry, in Hungary, the DNA of the film. So whenever there is a changing in the protagonist goes away, and we have to find another one, and I don't know. If we have the core elements of the film, then we can continue. We don't have to stop. So I think this is something very important to make at the beginning when we start to work together, and because this can give a basis, a strong basis for us too. I mean, for the director and the producer, and this can help also the co-production when someone is involved and there are changes all the time, and so that the co-producer doesn't feel that, okay, so I'm in on a boat which is not a strong one and I cannot stay on it. So this DNA thing, it's, I think, very important. And for a co-production, it's also, I know that it's important to have financing from your home country, and this is a really hard part, especially from Eastern Europe. And for example, here in Hungary, we have a one-window system. So if you go to the film fund, you cannot go to the TV. If you go to the TV, you cannot go to the film fund. So it's
they exclude each other.
And the TV fund, it's really small amount of money. Film fund is a bigger one, but they support 1 or 2 documentaries per year. So it's a really difficult thing, but thanks to Creative Europe, we have the media support, for example, which counts as if we have it, it's our resource. Then.
Window to Europe.
So it helps, really, it helps co-production. So, yeah.
Rosie?
We were just talking about this before, but I think when you're starting out, you're looking down the line of maybe 4 or 5 years, maybe more, working with that person. So you both have to be in agreement about why you're making that film. And there are lots of reasons why you make the film. Are you making the film to build your reputation and show off your skills as a director or as a team, or like your particular access and understanding of a particular story? Are you making the film for a broad, wide audience to be seen by as many people as possible? Are you making that film because you want to make money eventually and make a sustainable living out of that? And these things are they don't always come all together. You can't always do all 3 of those things. Are you making the film to educate? Because if you're making a film to educate and you want it to be seen by the broadest possible audience, it doesn't necessarily want to sit on Netflix on page 3 of the documentaries thing where nobody can find it and you're not allowed to do certain things with it. So it's really complicated, and that's why it's really important to decide that from the start. And it can obviously evolve as you go along. And I also, from my personal point of view, I've learned that you need to have a limit of we did our last film for Impact. We wanted to see people in it's called the Workers' Cup, and it's going to be on in about an hour actually, and on Saturday as well. but we wanted to make a film that could be seen in the region it was about, which is really hard because Netflix and all of those others at the time, 2 years ago, couldn't promise us that they wouldn't censor our film in that region as per the government's requests. Yeah, because they want the audience. There's a fight for certain audiences, which is going on all around the world for certain languages, like Arabic is was the language that they were going after, even though there's not a word of Arabic in the film. And so it's complicated. And you have to work out what your limits are, and you also need maybe some get out, escape routes to television or online, or to online series, serialize your film, because things happen, people get married, have babies across the years, and you have to have those things that you've talked about early on enough that you realise are there as your backup.
At the risk of repeating some of the things that have been said, I think in the early stage, at least from my experience, it's very desirable to sort of, figure out what's the core, what's the common ground that all parties involved in the film are committed to. Now, my experience has been that sounds like a wonderful fairy tale. The reality is there's constant strife and things don't go as planned. So I think what I'm trying to implement now for current projects that I'm working on as a producer is really to find ways of, having productive ways of structuring conflict, because you're going to have disagreement, I think. So I think, at least from my experience, I've worked with, for example, the film that's screening here tomorrow, I worked with a very strong head director, and even though we're friends, we were...
What director doesn't have a strong head, huh? I've never come across that.
Oh no, it's all good, all good. If you see me, it's this little charming man, and you don't think you can get that angry. But anyway, so I think that's a big lesson I've taken away from that, is to find ways of acknowledging that people are going to have disagreements, and also of having the flexibility to to change your mind if something doesn't work out. But I don't know if that's
I would like to add, when you were analyzing your film at the beginning of the journey, and when you're thinking about how to get the money for it together, you should also be honest with yourself about how much money you really need to make that film, depending on these ambitions of being all on the same page. So, and that's a conversation between the initial director and the initial producer, like the first ones who were discussing their first idea. And from the beginning, you should be saying, okay, this is a film that we do want to keep in a local context, or is this a film that has a greater global meaning? And that you should just be really honest with yourselves about it, because if you can save yourself like the bother of the international co-production, because it's a beautiful bother, but it's still bother, then don't do it. Don't do it. But if you have to do it because you don't have any other choice, which is also clear, it's clear to me that there are people in this room who have no other choice but to work with partners from abroad, then you really need to ask people who've already done it how they did it and where they met the best people. And then you also need to put your kind of vanity aside and say, okay, maybe the best place for me to find a co-producer for this project isn't at DOKLeipzig, or it isn't at IDVA, but rather it's somewhere like here. There are plenty of great people, or enthusiastic people around inside your local context who will come to you. And if there are people who are coming to you, to your home city, to your hometown, it means that they are interested in who you actually are. Interested in what is happening in Budapest right now, or in Hungary right now, or in Central Europe right now. And that's also usually a good indication of a better kind of person, I would say. And then the next thing is really find producers who you trust and who you love, because they will open other doors that just working straight with a financier will not, because they are in the rickety boat with you, and they also have a stake in making it happen. And sometimes that is somebody who is very small but ambitious. It's not necessarily always the bigger production companies or the people who are working in like the traditional field of like cinema and television. It might be somebody coming from a slightly different background, but who is really enthusiastic about you and your talent and your story.
Can I add one thing?
Sure.
In the work that I do, sometimes I do war zone-y type stuff. So it's really also important to recognise, you were saying earlier about how stuff falls away. I have a sort of rule where I work on 6 projects with each equal energy, and always only one will work out of the 6. And that's either because of politics getting in the way. I kind of raised 200,000 for a film in Ethiopia, and then the students riot and burn down the place I was going to make a film about. That happened. And then, there are all sorts of risks. So you have to decide who's the risk to. Is the risk to your pocket? And then you have to go through all the evaluations we talked about. Is the risk to your protagonist? If the risk is to your protagonist, sometimes it's a risk to go and share the project with other people, because you are the person who protects that protagonist. When you bring in other people, it can sometimes confuse the way their story is told and the way they are protected, in my experience. If the risk is to your team, like in Iraq or somewhere like that, I have tended to lean now towards a television route with some kind of holdback for festivals, if that's possible, and that seems to be the thing that more and more people are doing, because the kind of the liability that you face as an individual if something goes wrong is just so huge, and there's so little insurance out there to protect you, and anyway. So the areas of risk is also something to assess right from the start.
You just mentioned that here in Hungary, we are in a very special situation. We are really lucky to have only one Windows. I mean, it's a joke. Support, but actually, when we want to make a co-production, and we have enthusiastic producers who are looking for international sources, and we are actually really lucky, for example, to get some media support. It can happen, but it can happen in Hungary, that local foundations are not really happy that your project is supported first from abroad, and then they are only just the second institution who are really surprised, and they really don't really like that. First they reject the project, then it's abroad somehow successful as for development, and then there is a kind of conflict. How does it work in your country? I mean, does it matter where do you start the fundraising? I mean, at your local foundation, national foundation, or first abroad? Do you have any kind of experience?
Well, I'm not sure it does matter. I think at least it's probably quite specific to your national circumstances. I think as somebody who's based in Germany, but who's worked in also international productions in the United States that did not involve public funding, I think, from the German perspective, I think there's a lot of opportunities and a lot of inquiries that come out of other countries because of the strong funding, or at least historically strong funding system in Germany. But I think at the risk of, I don't know. I don't think there's a straightforward answer here. I think it's really very much, I don't know. You chime in on this, please.
I think a few things. The first one is, I think nepotism exists, and so you try and help your friends as much as you can, and also funders who see projects from either people with a track record or people who show such an enthusiasm or such an expertise on a subject always have a better chance than something that's weaker. And I also think that I know for myself, I have this terrible thing that young people call FOMO, fear of missing out. And I do not like to miss out on things. So I like to be the first if I can be, because I want to be also your cheerleader when I can be. But I think that I think that the case of Germany is also different to the case of the UK or to Hungary, in that we still have a complete audiovisual chain. So we have all the funds that you can apply for at all the different stages for all kinds of different projects. It's very competitive, but we live in an intact economy where we have freedom of press and freedom of speech to a certain degree. Of course, like everything is changing, but that is our reality. So for us, like, and sometimes I think this also leads to cultural insensitivity in these practices. For us, sometimes we just don't know that you guys have these kind of problems. And so we think we're doing you a favor by giving you the money. And maybe we are, but I mean, documentary filmmakers, pardon my French, are always going to land on someone's shit list. And if you're not on the shit list, then also maybe you're not doing a good job. Like maybe we are obliged to have a little social anarchy, create a little chaos, as long as it's not at the expense of anyone's personal safety or financial ruin, I would hope. So I don't know if that is an answer.
How is it in the UK?
Now, listen, I'm a bit of an outsider to the UK, so I only arrived there a year ago, even though I'm very British. So I'm still trying to understand it, so I should probably have done my research in the few hours between delivering a very tiring Khashoggi documentary yesterday and arriving here today, but I haven't. But as far as I understand the public funding in the UK, it's mainly after the fact, after you've delivered everything. And then the only other way that I concede to apply for funding in the UK is as an individual, where I can get like a 50 grand fund for myself as a startup for any project I want to. But there are very few people who get it. It sounds a bit similar to that, you know, and it's hugely nepotistic. I don't even understand my own language. So yeah, it's really difficult in the UK, but the advantage of the UK is we have a huge potential commercial television audience, and that's great. But having a UK producer on board can sometimes be bad because we bring so little to the table, and a lot of the projects I'm on at the moment are just coming to that realization. And it's a painful experience where I have to explain to them that what I told them at the first instance is now coming to pass. Maybe you know about the funds that I don't know about.
I mean, I just wanted to say, the other thing is about this aspect of deliverables. So if Patrick goes to a German film fund for you and comes back with 120,000 euros, then you have to have a film that is deliverable for a German audience. And we have formats, which also sucks, which is also why German documentaries are kind of not so great, I think. But like, if we're all honest, like the funding system doesn't necessarily build up to a qualitatively better film. So we have all the money, but the system somehow, I would argue, maybe takes a little bit of the creativity out. But that means that if Patrick comes with the 120,000 euros from like the film fund, or from the 60,000 from the broadcaster, then the broadcaster and the film fund need something that they can put in the cinemas or on television. And if you don't deliver that, then you have to give the money back. And that happens. And so that means that maybe your beautiful small Hungarian poetic art film that is that's a bad example, that is 45 minutes long, that's a real problem. That's a real problem for your funders, because you can't put it in the cinema, you can't broadcast it on television, and then they're going to take the money, they're going to want their money back, and then you will never get money again. Or exactly, and so that's where also these co-production relationships really are important, because you need to work with somebody who understands the deliverables. And actually, I work more at the moment with, we have so-called decision makers. The decision makers get invited to the film festival to come and pick up new films, either because they're funders, or they're broadcasters, or they're a sales agent or a distributor. And I actually only work with UK producers at the moment. We had the broadcasters back this year, but like the commissioners don't really commission or co-produce the kinds of projects that we have at DOKLeipzig. So I really need to have people who feel very passionately about the creative documentary form as an art form, and who are looking for creative ways to sneak these projects in, so that once they're finished, maybe they get picked up by television. Maybe.
Yeah, in terms of formats in the UK, we've got a really small number of formats available now. There's only one television strand that has the feature length, and that one pays about £5, like €5 now. Like, it's got nothing, and they usually like to see it go everywhere else. They don't want to take a risk. So yeah, it's less and less possibilities, sadly.
Yeah, it's also true that, for example, if we go to the film TV fund here, which is the smallest, let's say, support we can get, in this way it's a small amount, but on the other hand, they don't take any rights. If your length is different from what you submitted, you can ask, and of course you have to argue why it's longer and why it became a feature length, but it can become a feature length if you can have a confirmation from the channel which is involved. So if for the channel it's okay, you can make it longer. At the end, you don't have this payback thing at all. So I mean, yes, it's a small amount, but this can help you to go on the international platform and find co-producers. Then we have to find co-producers, but as you say, we have to find co-producers where they can bring in this kind of so more independent money than like formatted broadcasters and whatever, but or from funds who doesn't require this kind of formats or doesn't require 150% of spending in the region or in the so yeah, we have to be careful with co-production. It's really true, but so there are bad sides and good sides of smaller supports also.
So there are less formal windows, but there are more new ways and the growing audience for documentary, which is good news, right? Yeah. Which so that's the good news is there's more eyeballs out there. They're just not paying anything to watch what they're watching. I wanted to also flag something about deliverables actually, which is that one good thing about US and UK TV having less money is that they're all willing to co-produce together to build themselves, to build those guys and build themselves out. And they're willing to be more flexible, in my experience, on the actual formatting. In the US and the UK, they're willing to we'll be a bit more like PBS Frontline this time. No, we'll be a bit more like Panorama this time, and we'll just deal with it on the other side, so that they don't all have to be spending as much as each other on the edit. But the one thing I really want to flag is when you are seeking those alternative funds that you need to make up stuff, US and UK particularly, and I'm sure maybe you're going to say Germany as well, are extremely strict on what money has gone into the film, and it can sometimes see it completely thrown out and becomes toxic if it's had even a small amount of money from an NGO or an individual that is not seen to be kind of the right sort of individual to be giving money to the film.
So this issue of matching private funding with public money, and maybe you can talk about this more, because your film also didn't sell to German television in the end, but you work with a sales agent, but you also had a self-financing model, I felt, just in our conversations yesterday, is that public money can't be matched with donorships because the integrity of the piece is tarnished in that they think that it becomes public relations for a cause or public relations for an individual, rather than the writ of public media being for the people and being neutral and presenting windows into worlds and education to people who wouldn't otherwise have it. But maybe you can talk about your experience.
Yeah, I think that last part is 100% correct. Now, looking back at my first project, which was largely, well, at least initially self-financed, I don't know if we would have had another opportunity to even seek out public money because we had no track record, no proof of concept. So I think the biggest fear that anybody has in a co-production or in any production really when they give you money is, are they going to be able to deliver this film at all? Are they going to be able to finish it? And so I think that's a big hurdle to meet. But I think to your point, yeah, our film we would have, even if we had had more of a track record at the time, I think garnered a lot of skepticism because we had this patchwork of private funding, and there would have been a high burden on us to provide transparency in terms of where did this funding come from, are there any interests attached, when some of it was, we applied for some small grants, but then we also just went around and asked friends for money, put in some of our own financing and so on. So in many ways it was I would say a learning experience that teaches, or that taught me that it's really important to think from the start about how you're going to do it, even if it's an uncertain journey, even if you have a budget that's maybe just an estimate and you maybe needing twice as much money later. But I think it's very important to select a financing plan from the start and commit to it. And the answer may very well be that for some films that it's not public money. So I don't know. I found this to be my experience has been, and like I said, I've worked on several productions in North America, and my experience there's a lot of openness to, I think, especially when it comes to sort of controversial films. We made a film that's about police brutality in the United States, and we ended up selling it to Amazon eventually. And that money came all from private investors, basically. And I don't know if we could have made this film in the same way if we had been subject to guidelines of public funders or other institutions. So I think, in that case, in hindsight, maybe we did the right thing, but it's definitely, I would say it's something that needs to be addressed at an early stage, and then you need to stay committed to your plan. I don't know if that's,
It's impossible. It's impossible.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my experience is in general that there's very few rules that work. I think documentary filmmaking is, I know your questions are getting towards, how can you make the perfect plan? How can you figure it out from the start? My experience has been, I learn a little bit from every project that I work on, but I am hardly in a position where I can write the book. So I think everything you're getting here is sort of the, snapshot advice based on recent experiences, from me anyway. So that's a caveat.
I wanted to add that back to the small money we have, that when we start a project with this funding, let's say, it's also very important to agree with everybody that yes, we go international, we try to have partners, but it can happen that at the end we don't have any co-producers, let's say, or any additional money. So it's also something that it's really hard for directors also to understand that sometimes you have like this 25,000 euros, let's say, and that's all. And we have to make the film from that money if we don't have other partners. And yes, of course, we try to do our best. But if we start with a budget like with a 200,000 euros budget, and we have 25 secured, and this is the money you have, and you have to start doing things, and it's a documentary, and you cannot wait 2 years for starting your shooting. So I mean, this stick to your original plan. It doesn't really work always, or maybe never for us, because we really have to how to say. So yeah, start from thinking of also if we can make it from the small amount, and if we cannot, then we shouldn't do it, because if we start to spend money and then we don't have any other funding, and the half of the film, let's say, is shot, or I don't know, and then you cannot continue, and you cannot ask, I mean, directors cannot ask producers to, okay, so empty your pockets and make the film. It's not. So I think it's very important also to be honest at the beginning about what you have, what you can secure, but also to precise what your dreams are and what your goal is, and try to reach it. But it's not always easy, and especially from Hungary with the language nobody speaks on the world. It's not easy at all.
I think Myanmar is just such an interesting example on different levels that are important to think about. But when we select projects for our co-production market, we expect a 5-year turnaround. So we are making an investment in something that also costs no money. You have to pay us, but like we are making an investment in the completion of your film. You know, that's the first stamp of deliverability, that a film festival believes that this film team can make this film, and that if they don't participate in this market, then they may not have the opportunity to find the money anywhere else. Like that's really the core of how we make our decision-making process about who is invited to participate and who isn't. And this idea that you, like in your case, I was so surprised that it was finished so quick, because everything was in place, and then you came to the right place at the right time and found the right person who applied for also small money, not big money, but was the closing fund in order to make the next steps into like the international distribution. But like that's rare, you know, that's the one project every 2 years has that kind of quick turnaround. And for the other 34 projects, it's like a really long and hard slog. And it's really, really, really important that if you are deciding to enter this international world, we're very nice. Like, it's a very nice place to come. I really invite you. The doors are always open. But if you are going to go there, be strategic. Be really strategic. Because also submission fees add up. Participation fees add up. We can't always invite everyone for free all of the time. Like, Julianna has to write a check for 350 euros to come to DOKLeipzig, and then she has to pay for the gas or the flights to drive her there, and then the hotel rooms, which in Leipzig are still reasonably priced, but it's still 100 euros. And all of these development costs add up. And so if you go to a market and you don't have a plan, it's just like flushing money down the toilet, flushing it down the toilet. And it doesn't matter how good our matchmaking skills are, or how, I mean, there's also space for magic. Sometimes magical things happen that you don't expect, but like, you really need to prepare yourselves for it. And the easiest way to do it is to ask other people who have done it. And usually people are honest. I don't know.
Next question. Yes. Actually, you have different experiences. Also, as for the genre, I mean, full-length documentary or regarding a doc series, which is actually now told for us directors, filmmakers, that the documentary series is the future. And I tell you, it's a big challenge, I think, for the filmmakers and directors. From my point of view, you know, I was always dreaming about that world. I'm not sure I am able to make a docu-series because it's an endless, and you know, I will die when I when I finish a production. But as for a full-length documentary, it's the most beautiful moment. I mean, for the authors, when it's screened in a theater, a cinema. So there is a theatrical release. In case of docu-series, it's a different case. Rosie, you have quite a strong experience as for the docu.
I haven't done the documentary series.
No?
No, I haven't. No, I've tried to pitch them, and
sorry,
I made an online documentary series, which was paid for by Vodafone, and it was supposed to be broadcast daily from the middle of the Amazon jungle. But Vodafone's, everyone knows Vodafone, right? It's a big brand.
Yeah.
But Vodafone's satellite system didn't work, so we ended up having to like literally canoe down the river, get in a car for 2 hours, and then go broadcast our thing from to go, then canoe back down the river, and it took a 5-hour round journey to live broadcast our documentary every evening. And after the second episode, it resulted in death threats, and we had to close ourselves down. So it didn't go that well in my documentary series experience, but it was like 5 years ago.
Good grief! Now, see, all the things I thought we talked about were personal. I'm just kidding. Well, maybe I'll say something about my dreams in a second, but maybe on the question of format in general, I think I agree with you that there's sort of this inherent beauty about having a feature-length documentary because it can play in a theater, and there's something magical and very, I think, effective, and it's just how films are meant to be watched. So I think there's that allure in having a feature-length project. Now, I think you're right. Today, there's the serialized format is very attractive. I think there's a lot of things that can be said for it from a, there's you're able to cover a lot more ground. I think it's clearly what the audiences are asking for these days. So I think there's all these appeals, but clearly it's very, very hard to make them, very, very hard to pitch them. And as for me personally, we've not talked about short format things. I after completing 2 feature-length films last year, all I wanted to do was make something short because I wanted to have that experience of, you know, getting started and having a finished product and maybe do it in a couple of weeks or a couple of months instead of 3 or 4 years. So I think that's, I guess, you know, it's obviously, there's multiple levels of consideration. There's sort of the creative process and the satisfaction you arrive from it as a filmmaker, which is very much intangible. But, you know, then there's also the commercial angles. And I think from that standpoint, if you can make it happen, of course, having a series or a mini-series is a very attractive thing. And to your point, I guess your question about dreams, so I'm currently interested in, but it's a very early stage, developing a web series, which, you know, at least for now I'm calling it a web series because it's low stakes and it doesn't mean I have high expectations of myself yet. But that's about questions of feasible utopia, sort of utopia for realists, questions about, I don't know, what would a criminal justice system look like without a militarized police force, or what would an economy look like if we only work 2 or 3 days a week, and are these questions feasible? You know, just sort of that sort of exploration. And I think that is a super exciting thing, to have these, you know, these types of questions that you can only answer in a serialized concept. So I think, I know everybody here probably has money on their mind and, you know, wants to know about, okay, how we're gonna, you know, turn this into a co-production and get funding for it and all of that. But I think what I'm finding in this development process right now, it's really important to think about, I guess, finding the right format for the question that you have, for the topic that you have. So I think there's, you know, certainly trends, and currently everything seems to be moving towards having, you know, series, and, you know, Netflix and Amazon and all these new players are driving that, obviously, and increasingly commissioning that also, that type of work. But yeah.
I don't want to live in a world where we just watch Making of a Murderer UK, Making of a Murderer Hungary, Making of a Murderer Berlin. You know, I don't want to live in this world, and so that's why I think like many things about it, I think you should analyze your content and decide how much is in there as well. Like, is there enough in here to justify this series? Because if you're pitching it to someone like Arte, they will know immediately because they see so many projects, and of course they underestimate things, and of course we all make mistakes. But you know, like they know how much content they need if they're going to give you €1 million to make something, and if they're going to give you €1 million to make it, then it's never going to be the first thing you make. Or if it is the first thing that the director is making, or the directors, if there's more than one of them, then if you can team up with somebody who has already made the €1 million series that they're satisfied with, and that is someone like a German or a French co-producer, who might then turn out to be the majority producer, and then you are just the facilitating producer, so to speak, probably doing all of the work, probably a woman, unfortunately. But like, the doors are there. You know, humans are just humans, and the doors are kind of always a little bit open, and there's always ways to find people who can push them more open for you. But again, you should know the kinds of series that Arte are making, and that means you have to switch your television on and watch them. And then after you've watched them, you might not think that that's what you want to make, because they know their audience, they have their formats, and if you aren't producing films for their audience in their formats, then the doors will never be open, because we do not live in a time where people can afford to take risks, where Western broadcasters can afford to take risks. We live in a time where we are all just holding on to get through a very turbulent period. So I think go for it. I mean, I always encourage people to do crazy things. Go for it. But just, if you're going to do it for it, prepare yourself. Like, understand who you're talking to, understand what they like. You know, if you're making a film about food markets, then maybe it would work, you know? There's no reason. But if you're making a film about sheep herders in Carpathian Mountains who are affected by climate change, forget it. Forget it. Don't even waste your energy.
I actually forgot, I did make a series last year, and it was a co-pro, and I completely forgot I even did it. Sorry, it was with a Finnish director, Petri Lukkinen, a Danish producer who I just met at a festival like this and got on. I really liked the idea. The director was kind of out there, but I really liked her, and I thought we can work together. And for once, I was able to bring some BBC money to the party, because this was just before I got my day job. And we made a series, and they were like, we want more, let's make this bigger. It was a 6-part, 10-minute series about 5 boys who had never met each other. They met on the internet, and they were friends on the internet, and they all had mental health problems. And by the time they finished the series, which was a 2-week trip around Europe, they'd all finished, they got over their mental health problems, and they were a year older. And they were like, no, we want to, like, let's go back into their mental health problems. We were like, well, they don't have mental health problems now. They're kind of well-adjusted individuals, and they're going to university. And then the BBC went and made something just slightly different, which has become a repeating series, which is an extremely risky thing that you just have to put up with if you're making something. But I just wanted to give you guys the money breakdown so you understand what sort of money's out there for this sort of thing. This is on BBC 3, it's on iPlayer, which is a very big deal in the UK, but we did get the rights back after 6 months to sell around. BBC gave us £60,000 and we got, which is like 75,000 euros, and then we got 15,000 euros development money to go and do the actual trip right out at the outset from CPH Docs, and we were able to show it in the cinema at CPH Docs and at numerous festivals, so it got like a bit of a cinema screening as a back-to-back. Because it was short enough that it didn't feel too absurd to sit there for hours on end. So anyway, that was the series I made.
Can I ask a question? I want to ask you a question. Can you talk about your Vodafone sponsorship? I'm just saying, because we talked about alternative, maybe it's interesting to other people, I hope it would be interesting to me, because that's another route that could be interesting for certain formats to have corporate sponsorship. You know, obviously companies like Red Bull do this for sports documentaries and so on. So I don't know if you have any experience on it, but I'd be curious to hear.
There was like about 5,000 to 10,000 euro legal costs of that at the beginning. And thank God there was, because when we had the death threats and we had to stop, there was a huge problem, and our contract was this thick, but it protected us and it protected them. But you have to, when you're working with organisations that are big, you have to be big as them, and you need the best lawyer that you know to go to war, preferably somebody who perhaps used to work for them, who understands where their little clauses are. And most of these places, they don't have, if you persuade them, and it takes a long time to persuade them to do something different, they're taking a risk. They're doing something they've never done before, and they're kind of, when they decide to do it, they're probably 1 or 2 individuals that have pushed it within the organisation, and the rest is feeling a bit nervous. So you have to be aware, and then you have to make sure those individuals are going to, be with you the rest of the journey, because it's quite brave when they do that kind of thing. But I think, obviously there's a risk to your integrity of working with brands. You just have to separate out the brand from the subject matter. And you also just have to, in your own heart and head, know that what you're doing is not something that is being affected by the brand. I mean, on the other hand, everybody needs to earn money. And if you have regular funding from, I'm just trying to think, like if you're making films for Coca-Cola about, for instance, they've got this cool studio in Lahore, so they make these, they have a music studio, so let's say you're making a series of films about cool Pakistani musicians, and that's enabling you to fund some amazing film in the middle of nowhere in Pakistan. Go for it, and don't worry about integrity whatsoever. There's 2 different, you don't always have to be full of integrity in my mind. You have to give it up sometimes a little bit. I mean, you try, but there has to be a way to pay the bills.
And I think that business model is interesting, actually. I think that there are combinable moralities. And I think that the most important thing is that people aren't going bankrupt. And so if you do have to do the 6-part series for someone like Vice, which isn't maybe as fulfilling as the thing in the middle, like, that's okay. That's fine. Even like the big guys who you see at film festivals premiering their big films are also making hours and hours of television, hours and hours, in order to sustain that business model. No one is making a living from making feature docs. What? Or are you doing it?
Yes, but yeah, actually when I started to do this, I really had to put my own money in this, and I worked for, I was translating as a side job. I was working for other companies, writing media applications for money. I was, then I started to work for another production company, and all the money I gained, I put in my my company and in my films. So that's how it started. And let's say that now for the last 3 years, the company can live from what we are doing, feature-length documentaries. But it's really hard, and it's not what I feel now, that even if we ended up at Sundance and IDFA and Locarno and wherever we end up with our films, we have to find something, so that, or think in series, or go for feature films, or because it's really risky to just to rely on feature-length documentaries. So.
Also, as a company owner, you can actually build value in your company with a repeating series that people could actually then invest in, just or even buy. You know, it's amazing.
I can see very great documentary filmmakers and producers also sitting among the audience. So if you actually have any questions and thoughts, share with us, please. I give you my mic with pleasure. Do you have any questions? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Maria Takács. I'm from Hungary. I'm a documentary filmmaker, and thank you for all the answers and questions. I miss some way of thinking. That do you think about the online media like YouTube or Vimeo? Because I think we were only talking about mainly televisions and all these, you know, big companies and so on. But I think this way it's very open world now. And if yes, what do you think?
Well, okay, I should answer it. Yes. Again, I think there's at least 2 layers to that answer. I think what you were getting at with your question, if I understood correctly, is it's a very open medium. It allows you to reach people cross borders, and whether it's Vimeo or YouTube or any open access digital platform. So there's something very appealing, because I think as filmmakers we inherently want nothing more than for people to watch our films. So then logically the second question is, are there ways of monetizing that? So I think, so for example, for the project that we're screening here tomorrow, we are planning on putting it on an on-demand Vimeo platform soon. We're currently doing we're doing educational sales this semester, so it's important for us to keep the film out of the sort of public accessibility, but afterwards we want to basically make it available for a small screening fee, and then see where it goes. But the answer here is, I don't know, but I think there's something, I think there's something there. I think we're going to hopefully generate some revenues from that, and again, I think it's when you do this again and again, I think that's where it becomes interesting. So I'm sure with this project where we will learn some hard lessons maybe. But the other thing that I want to add, I think it really came to mind when you talked about your Vodafone experience. I think finding sponsors, and I think they don't necessarily have to be corporate sponsors, there could be foundation sponsors, or perhaps even private individuals. I think it's really important for for a web series to be to be out there and to just be able to breathe for a while. And if people like it, then I think it's the nice thing about it. It opens up opportunities, because people might become interested in sponsoring you at a greater level. You might be able to charge fees. You might be able to do something for depending on the format, maybe to do organize community screenings or university screenings, and do get it to a level where you can have people pay for some licenses for public screenings and things like that. So I think that's the big appeal, is basically passing that initial hurdle to just put your material out there, whether it's a short or documentary or maybe a mini web series or something like that. And you know, it's the equivalent of going to lots of co-production markets and pitching and pitching and pitching and eventually, hopefully, you know, striking gold. I think in a way you're putting yourself out there with the online project in the same way that you have to take that initial risk. You know, here's what I did, and hopefully people will like it. And then I think also not just critical, but also hopefully economic opportunities will derive from it. I'm an optimist.
It always depends on the content. It depends on the project. It depends like what you're trying to say and who you're trying to reach to tell it to or to be in conversation with. And so what we've been talking today is about co-production, but that this all falls more into like the distribution categories. And so like there are of course projects that YouTube are investing in, but like Vimeo On Demand have shut down their commissioning department. They don't commission anymore. And so it depends on what you're looking for. So I wouldn't say that I don't believe in like YouTube or self-distribution models or whatever. It's just that they're not necessarily complementary to public funding also necessarily, unless you go and say, hey, public funders, we have this idea and it's a web series and it has to be on YouTube and it has to be for free because it's for cultural worth. You know, there are always ways of framing a discussion with a funder. And if you can get them excited about it, then also exceptions always make the rules. Rules are constantly broken, which is also good to remember. Like if you really think that you have something that is very strong, then you can always just give it a go. But I mean, again, for me, the only problem is that I am yet to understand the revenue model. So I don't understand how if you put something on YouTube for free, you can make money from it. But if you don't care about making money, and then it's fine. But also just be careful because if you do, this is especially a problem for animators, like a lot of animation producers immediately self-publish their work on different platforms. But as soon as you put something on an internet platform, then festivals that have premiere statuses won't show your film. So you just have to be careful, just like about what you want to do with it, if you want to monetize it, coming back to the things that you were saying at the beginning of the session.
I have a lot to say on this subject actually, because I'm now the BBC Arabic technically, but BBC, we basically everything that the BBC does on the Middle East, anything that goes on the website, I'm supposed to be like the person who decides what goes on there, and we have all sorts of criteria that make us decide on those things. So the good news is there are like YouTube agents out there that can help you, and there used to be like, I remember there was like one 5 years ago at IDFA, and now I've seen so many more cropping up all the places. It's like anything, it's whatever you put in that you get out. And I think you're right in saying that having a commercial partner on board in much the same way as having co-pro people on board or NGOs on board will really help, because there's marketing costs to YouTube and Facebook and all these places. It's getting more and more complicated. The algorithms are against you. I don't know whether you guys read about Google is like kind of broken right now. Yeah, it's really hard right now to find what you're wanting. But there is a vast audience out there, and it's your job to try and help them get to you. And it's just that using kind of SEO marketing models that would have worked in the past is not really helping out right now because the algorithms are so difficult. So if you've got partners on board and they're shouting on your behalf, Vodafone sorry, I don't know why I keep mentioning Vodafone. I can't think of another brand now. If Ooredoo, which is a Qatari national telecoms brand, is like backing you, they're going to shout about it, and then you don't have to pay, £20,000 to get your 20,000 hits. Then that's great. I also just wanted to talk about a really interesting model that I'm always watching, which is Saudi Arabia, where there's almost no young people watching traditional television or reading traditional media because of censorship. So everybody's on VPN, everybody is therefore beyond the censorship wall and is already taking a risk the moment they go to watch anything, even if they're watching Peppa Pig is not shown in Saudi Arabia for obvious reasons. So they're showing a kid Peppa Pig, and they've had to go beyond the VPN, so what else is out there? And they've got some extremely sophisticated YouTube promotion schemes over there, and I really recommend reading about what places like that are doing, because they live only on YouTube. They have superstars. Well, we all have those superstars everywhere, I understand, but in Saudi it's a particular thing. And it's, the more that they crack down, the worse it's going to get. They're not just on VPN, they're on Tor, which means they're like in the black hole of the internet. Now they're in the dark web. So what can they, so there's a whole world out there and a huge audience. And people are making fortunes in Saudi Arabia. Take a look. Because nobody else can read it.
Are they professional makers?
Yes, they are.
My apologies, me culpa.
Doing really brave stuff.
Really, because I'm like the youngest member of the old school. I was raised, unfortunately, on this old model, and I am just waiting for it to inevitably combust, and we are getting closer and closer every day. But I always thought that kind of content was something different.
Oh yeah, there's a whole load of, mainly comedy is huge in many,
That's great though, because I want to start a market for documentary comedies, because I depressed everyone so badly in Leipzig this year. We told too many depressing stories, so maybe that's the intersection place.
Satire is the biggest, against dictatorship. Satire has always traditionally been the way to battle it, and so that's...
What I was thinking to add that it's a problem that we were raised on this old model, and it's if you don't dig into this field, you don't understand the world. So I mean, So if someone comes to me with a web series and web, how to finance it through the web or I don't know. For me, it's like, oh my God, I should spend, I don't know, 1 year to understand the whole stuff, how it works, but I think that there are more and more young people who understand much better this, and there are people who are becoming experts on that. So then, yeah, it's a hard job to find them, maybe, but
actually it's not. It's just that we're not looking at them. And that also, I said before, find a very, very old friend who can explain to you how we got to this situation, but also find a very young friend who's doing cool shit that you would otherwise never do yourself. And I'm constantly inspired by people who are doing things that are different from me, and so it's really easy to engage them. It's really easy to engage just by showing curiosity, and it's coming, like it's coming.
NFB in Canada is public money, and they put a lot on web series.
Yeah,
and so they must know what they're doing, and they're very old school.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I just don't know how they work. I've never gotten.
It's true also that classical TV is disappearing. We can really say that. So I have a lot of friends who doesn't have any more TV at home. I don't have TV at home, so it's disappearing.
Who has TV at home? Yeah. Do you have any questions? Some more questions? Yeah.
It's not a question, just a comment to what Rosie just said. It also happened in Norwegian television, NRK, which is also very traditional, the Royal Norwegian channel, that they started a web series, and it became such huge success that later on they put it on TV. So that's all. Sorry, comments.
There's no difference between TV and online. Watching anything online.
Hi, I'm Dora Nadetsky. I'm a producer from Hungary. And I have a question to mainly Rosie. If you have any experience or advice on a subject, that what if you have a director who lives in the UK, in London, and works in the UK in London, and is going through a citizenship, a double citizenship gaining. So she's a Hungarian citizen, but now she's gonna evolve into a British citizen as well. Is it, what do you think? Is it a really good thing when it comes to
She'll still
financing?
keep her Hungarian passport.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Well, then you're fine. She come and get Hungarian money,
But we've been,
and then go visit the broadcaster in London. It's good.
Yeah, but we've been talking about nepotism and track record and etc. And I'm just wondering if you maybe have like any case studies on this or anything that you heard that.
No, I mean all of my people that I work with. I mean, so I work with so many refugees. Most of the people I work with at the BBC, for instance, they arrived to the UK clinging onto the underneath of a lorry in most cases. And so I have many people who I know who are going through all of these situations, and if they were making independent films, I would encourage them to use their original passport. It's a lot easier than in the UK, definitely. But there are advantages. So if you do get a big festival, you can get money back from the UK if you've got a UK passport. That kind of thing.
And also you mentioned that you know, in terms of Brexit and what we're heading towards, and the co-production with the UK is basically a no-go zone, and you mentioned
I think we
that
don't know. You would be better to advise on this. I've had people say they don't want to work with me because of Brexit.
I think that's bullshit because, pardon my French again, I think that's bullshit because there are lots of places that don't have co-production treaties and yet you still work out ways to work together. You find ways to split rights. You know, technically France and Germany have a co-production treaty. They're the two biggest audiovisual networks or industries in Europe. But when you have Arte money, it means that both of the territories are gone. And so technically, for a documentary filmmaker, because Arte is 99.9% of the time involved if you're making a film that needs a budget, that needs to apply to like CNC or FFA, but producers work it out, and that's where you work it out in the contracts. That's where you work. It's a contractual thing, and so I think it's also a problem. I think that borders are bad, but I think that documentaries really are an exception to the rule.
Yeah, the only good news is that because we are losing all of our access to EU funding, and that has already begun. I've like been told not to apply for things. And so, yeah, it's been really nasty. I mean, it's just generally nasty Brexit. But so because of that, the government was like, oh, we really value our creatives, and they held all these big parties. I wasn't invited. I'm not part of the team yet. I keep trying to get part of the team. But the people who were invited were all told that, you know, there's going to be loads more money, so maybe there'll be some national money in the UK at some point in the future.
That's how you work it out in a co-production. That's how you have to produce the stuff. And the contracts are complicated, super, super complicated. And only like ambitious people will do it because ambitious people have the patience to go through the process and engage the lawyers.
Maybe you should give some advice on contracts. I personally am constantly confused about like is there a replicable model that we should all be looking at?
Me no know. I don't know. But maybe you can talk about it actually.
A woman captured became part of White Slavery and BBC, and so it was already screened on BBC, and for that we had a quite long way to go. I mean, of course it had to be formatted, and it was also a long process, but also there were all this issue around E&O insurance, which in Europe we don't really do all this stuff, and I E&O insurance. No, and we had to ask legal advice and again, and it wasn't enough for them. And okay, let's do it again, and let's see it with a criminal lawyer also, and it was like, will it stop one day? What is going on? And all the time we prepared something, and it took like, I don't know how many weeks to prepare it. We sent it, and no, it's not good enough. We need this and this, and answer that question, and okay, let's go back. And then, so it was like, I don't know how many times we had to send the legal opinion that it satisfied BBC at the end, and there were all these I don't know, questionnaires coming, and so stuff I never saw before that that had to be filled out, and I don't know, it was really like a new stuff, but of course it was doable, so it was not like okay, it's something we cannot do at all. We can do it, but it was much more complicated than.
But why didn't you give up in the middle and say, oh, this is too complicated? Because the money was good, or because you wanted to reach audiences? Like,
because I think it's an honor to be screened on BBC, and if it takes that, it takes that. So it's part of the job also. And if there is a big channel requesting this and that, and I can do it. So that's what I'm saying. That it was not like. Learn Chinese in 3 weeks and then deliver a speech in, I don't know, so it was stuff like that, but it was related to the film, it was related to the production, it was new stuff to do, but I did it, of course, I did it, but I'm just saying that it was much more complicated than with any other films we had before.
And there, I think for the contractual advice, I'm absolutely the wrong person to do it. Like, because I sit on, like when you organize markets, you sit on top of the market. You're not in it. Like, you're not down in the trenches doing the digging, signing the paperwork, taking the risks. You're just like making sure that there's white wine at 6 o'clock. You know, like that's no, it's not my only responsibility, but it's a really different thing. And that's when it's being part of networks and guilds, I think, are also really handy. Like, I remember, you're also a member, I think, of European Women's Audiovisual Network. They have a mentoring process where after you've made your first feature film and you want to make bigger projects, then they will pair you with other producers who are already going through it or have been through it, who can advise you. And it's the same with the BDC network. You know, there are all kinds of places you can go. The best people to ask are people who make the kind of films that you like and who you trust, or who you can build trust through drinking white wine at 6 o'clock with, you know? Maybe.
Any questions?
No more questions? Or some new questions? Some, no.
Would like to add something that a lot of places we discussed already this ITFA thing, that no projects are in ITFA forum this year from Eastern and Central Europe at all, and I discussed it with a lot of people now in Leipzig also during meetings, and just I want to encourage people sitting here around us that I think it was a specific year, and it's not a tendency, and we shouldn't believe that our films are not worth it, and we don't do things that are strong enough. So it happened like this. I was part of the pre-selection committee this year, and I saw very strong proposals, and for some reasons, I also voted for Eastern European projects to be in the forum. For some reasons, there were I think there were 730 projects submitted this year, so a lot of them. And probably others were even more strong than what was presented from this part of Europe. But just to say that I think our voice is very important, and we should submit and continue to submit to ITFA also for pitching, and there are other very strong possibilities. CPH Docs is very open for Central European projects. The Prague pitching is also, DOKLeipzig is also there, Sarajevo, the Ravkat Boutique for finishing projects is also there, so we shouldn't be upset, I think, and I don't know if there are, but I'm pretty sure there are films which will be shown from this region at ITFA. Yeah. So yeah, it was a question, I know, from some producers that is it a tendency, but it's not, I think.
Exactly. I think that that with great power comes great responsibility. You know, like, so of course we need to have fora where you can raise these kind of questions. And I know from working in Germany, and I know from doing selection not just for my markets, but also for all kinds of markets, for all kinds of film funds. And also I'm a trainer, so I go to places actively looking to help people enter the international market. And sometimes mistakes happen, and I think that this is a mistake, and I actually thought Orwell's apology was very sincere. But I know from my market you have like great tragedies that occur, you know, like when you get something that's submitted and it's like right on the edge. It's like the last projects that when you're tossing around to make a good kind of chemistry of projects that offers decision makers something for everyone, there are always 3 or 4 bitter tragedies, and I'm sure there were projects from this region that were the bitter ones. And you should just reapply, because also nothing makes people who organize markets happier than when you watch somebody grow and develop and watch projects go from strength to strength. And so for us, for example, you can resubmit. You don't get one, it's not like a film festival where you get one chance to submit and then it's burned. You can really come back. And I think collectively what maybe you can also ask, maybe they hate me for it, but you can ask for a feedback from the final selection committee about how those decisions were being made. And then it's not like, it's good if you ask a specific question as well. I answer people's questions, but if someone says, oh, would you give me feedback on why my project wasn't selected? It's like, no, I don't have time. But if you say, hey, our region was excluded and we deserve answers, and that means what exactly is the criteria that we are not fulfilling? And if that's, maybe it's something like you can't secure enough development money that qualifies you to be seen on the same playing field as other regions. And if that's the case, then you have to like plead for an exception to the rule, and maybe it will work. Or maybe they say, hey, your trailers aren't strong enough. And then you do what B2B is doing, like B2B is the the Baltic to Black Sea network, and they offer material polishing services that are free to participate in. So like there are all kinds of ways that we can up the game here, and I think it's really important to remember that we're actually all on the same team, and that team is like Team Creative Documentary, and we want to make good ones, and we want to reach audiences, and we want to work in like non-exploitative conditions. But as I said, we're just like bumbling blindly through a moment of chaos.
One thing I always say is a Virunga, if people, Oscar nominated or Oscar winning, I can't remember, nominated. That applied for it for 4 times and never got in, you know, so.
Sometimes it also happens that for bigger names, for example, that they say that, okay, this person can raise money elsewhere, or they can do it without us. And it happens also, so it can be too strong. I mean, and they prefer to have weaker. So.
I didn't select the Yes Men, the 3rd chapter of the Yes Men for the co-production market, which is selected for the central pitch, because it's a central pitch project and not a Leipzig project. So that's when it's about strategy. And it made me really happy because the producers complained. They complained that they weren't selected, and it made me think I was doing a good job.
I think the Workers' Cup applied to like 30 forums or various things over the 4 years we were making. We never got into anything. So. Except at the end, sometimes. Yeah. Exactly.
That cost money. But you did profit a lot from it. Oh yeah. Just like emotionally, educationally, all sorts of things. Yeah, that's great.
More questions? So let's, yeah. Okay.
Hi, I'm Marek Novák, I'm a producer from Czech Republic, and I don't have a question, maybe just an impression, and I hope it will make any sense, but it still echoes what Brigid said some moments ago. about pitching to Arte, if you have some project about food markets, that it can work, but if you have a story about Carpathian sheep or or what was it, that you should forget it. And I've been thinking of it, and it feels to me that yes, here in Central Eastern European region, we often have stories about Carpathian sheep, sometimes metaphorically, sometimes literally. And I think so. Those are often authentic stories we should make here, and a lot of them can be like beautiful films. And most of us want to have this mantra of accessing Western broadcasters and having, because they have more money and they do engage in co-productions, unlike many other broadcasters in our region. So, but like this thing that there is this kind of, I don't know, maybe prejudice is too strong of a word. It certainly isn't about that, but that you should forget going with Carpathian sheep to that. And it often happens. I know I don't want to question that. I agree on many levels with it. But I don't know. I've been thinking like, what is the solution for that? Because then some of those Carpathian sheep become great films, and when somebody picks them up, they become, when somebody validates them, then also the broadcasters and the financiers feel like, yeah, those Carpathian sheep were great, let's do it again.
Yeah, Sweetgrass.
Yeah.
The film already exists. I
Yeah.
mean, it's not in Carpathia. I don't even know where Sweetgrass was, but it was shown at every film festival everywhere in the entire world 10 years ago. I'm not saying don't do it, and I say forget about it also to be provocative. Also make that film, but think about very carefully if that is a film that should be developed into a series, if there's enough material for it to be a series, and if you are going to pitch it to Arte for one of their slots, then you have to find a language that they will say, okay, this is something for our audience, and sometimes that might not be you, but it might be Christian Beets from Gebruder Beets, you know, and maybe Christian can find the way to present that project and make it happen. But I just think that we have to have realistic conversations, because I think, one, follow your dreams, but also two, don't waste energy on too much rejection that is unavoidable. But I mean, you would make the sheep film.
Yeah, actually what I wanted to say when you formulated your question was that don't confuse broadcasters with fans. It's a totally different thing. And broadcasters, when they invest in co-production or as in pre-sale or whatever, they think all the time to their audience. And when we are talking about Carpathian sheep, are these sheep talking to French people or to German people? That's what they think when they are investing in co-production. And but if you make a fantastic film out of it, maybe they see it at some festival and they will say, okay, I want to buy it because it became a fantastic film. But when you are just doing a film and they don't know the end result, and they don't know if the language of the sheep is in parallel with their languages, then they don't risk. That's what she said also, that they don't want to risk money.
I absolutely agree, and I think wanted to make a point actually about this risk taking, because it's very non-systematic, and like at least in Czech Republic, the broadcaster is always using the mantra of the audience. Like sometimes they use it in a way that, okay, this is not for our audience, this is for our audience, and the audience is then, it's like a vicious circle where nobody knows anymore what the audience actually wants, because it's about being afraid, and also by like being paid based on the audience. So there's a lot of elements in play, but like, yeah, the point was about this.
But for example, if you want to make a film about these sheep, and you want German money for it, for example, you can go with a German editor and work with them, or make the whole post-production in Germany. And then you have German money, because the German fund will give you this money, because you will have the creative points you need to get that money. So, and after that, maybe the film will be shown also on their television, because it will become something more German at the end. So, you know, this is a strategic thing.
I don't think that there is like right or wrong, you know, like everything is fine. Everyone should do it the way that they want to do, but it's just that you can't have everything all the time. So it's just that you can make your beautiful, or there are very rare occasions where your festival film, your broadcast film, your online film, your educational film is the same thing, I think.
The cafe, the sheep film. So I think, funnily enough, online is growing to be a place where these films are very, like, you know, there's an alternative audience.
PBS commissions shorts now too.
So PBS POV, the home in North America for subtitled films, for non-English language films, now also commission shorts. And the money's good, it's like good money. I mean, it's not a lot because it's just for a short, but like there are all kinds of spaces, all kinds of spaces.
Some comments, notes, questions? Okay, so I think, first of all, long life for documentaries and documentary filmmakers and producers as well. Thank you very much for this discussion, and let's continue maybe while we are drinking a really good coffee that we actually all need. Am I right? I'm sorry, I just invited everyone. You are all very welcome. Thank you for coming. Thank you very much.